loomed uncertain, a path littered with emotional landmines and ethical dilemmas, a journey that would test the strength of their bond and challenge the very foundations of their identities. The park bench was cold, the late afternoon sun offering little warmth against the chill October air. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot, a brittle counterpoint to the heavy silence that hung between Susan and Mike. 15 years. 15 years since they'd last seen each other. 15 years of shared laughter, stolen kisses, and unspoken promises, all now overshadowed by the stark, undeniable truth of their shared DNA. Susan arrived first, her breath misting in the crisp air. She'd chosen this secluded corner of the park deliberately, seeking the anonymity of solitude, a place where their painful reunion wouldn't be observed, wouldn't be judged. The carefully chosen outfit, a muted gray coat and scarf, reflected her internal landscape, subdued, muted, and grieving. Her usually vibrant eyes were shadowed, the corners etched with the lines of unshed tears. She watched Mike approach from a distance, his gait hesitant, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that mirrored her own. He looked older, harder somehow, the carefree charm of their youth replaced by a haunted intensity. The vibrant energy that had once characterized him seemed dulled, muted by the weight of the secret they both carried. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze searching hers, a mixture of apprehension and longing in his eyes. The silence stretched, an uncomfortable chasm that neither of them seemed capable of bridging. It was a silence thick with unspoken words, with years of shared history now tainted by the bitter knowledge of their biological connection. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the ghosts of what had been and could never be. Finally, Mike spoke, his voice a low rumble that barely carried on the wind. I didn't know what else to do, he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. I needed to see you. To talk. Susan nodded, her throat constricting. The words she wanted to say, the anger, the hurt, the overwhelming sense of betrayal seemed to catch in her throat, choked by a torrent of conflicting emotions. Me too, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They sat in silence for a long moment, the silence punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. The serene setting of the park starkly contrasted with the storm raging within them. The meticulously manicured lawns and the colorful autumn leaves felt like a cruel mockery of their shattered lives. Mike broke the silence again, his gaze fixed on the ground. I've been investigating, he said, his voice strained. I've been trying to understand. He looked up, his eyes pleading. I needed to find out what happened, how this happened. Susan understood. She'd been doing the same. Burrowing into her work, she'd tried to escape the reality of their shared secret, the unsettling truth that they were more than just former lovers. They were siblings, bound by a genetic link that transcended the love they'd shared. The romantic memories, once cherished, now felt like a betrayal, a cruel twist of fate that had ripped apart the fabric of their lives. I found some things, he continued, his voice still low, hesitant. About the clinic, the scandal. He paused, searching for the right words, for a way to articulate the painful discoveries he'd unearthed. It was negligence, a terrible mistake. Susan's heart sank. She'd suspected as much. The possibility of a deliberate deception had haunted her, but the thought of a careless error, a medical mishap that had irrevocably altered the course of their lives, felt even more devastating. It was the randomness of it all, the sheer absurdity of fate's cruel hand, that seemed the most unbearable. My mother, she never told me, Mike confessed, his voice breaking slightly. She kept it a secret all these years. I don't understand why. He looked at Susan, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and confusion. Why would she do that? Susan didn't have an answer. She didn't understand either. The secrecy, the deception, the years of blissful ignorance that all seemed like a cruel joke, a nightmare from which they would never wake. The betrayal wasn't just from their mothers. It felt like a betrayal of their shared past, of the innocent love they'd shared as teenagers. "It's not just about the mothers," Susan said, her voice still trembling slightly. "It's about us. About everything we had. Everything we thought we had." The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. What about their shared memories? The countless nights spent together? The dreams they'd shared? Were they all tainted now, rendered meaningless by the inescapable truth of their biological connection? The weight of their shared secret, the realization of their incestuous past, threatened to crush them, to suffocate the remaining embers of their relationship. The conversation drifted, circling around the painful truths they had uncovered: the negligence of the fertility clinic, the silence and secrecy of their mothers. They talked about their families, their upbringings, searching for common threads, for clues that might explain their unexpected connection. Yet, each answer seemed to raise more questions, the revelation of their siblinghood casting a long shadow over their past, their present, and their uncertain future. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the park. The air grew colder, the chill seeping into their bones, mirroring the icy feeling that had settled between them. The shared history they'd once celebrated now felt like a source of profound sadness, a bond tinged with a terrible irony. As the light faded, Mike stood, his silhouette framed against the deepening twilight. I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Susan remained seated, her gaze fixed on the ground, her heart heavy with the weight of their shared secret, the emotional turmoil tearing her apart. The unspoken questions hung between them, a testament to the depth of their pain, the complexity of their dilemma. The love they had shared, once a beacon of light, was now a flickering flame, threatened by the icy winds of their unexpected reality. The weight of it all pressed down on them, heavy and inescapable. The drive home was silent. The once vibrant colors of the city blurred into a somber palette of grays and blacks, mirroring the desolate feeling inside her. Susan felt adrift in a sea of unanswered questions, of profound loss, and of a sorrow so deep that it seemed to steal the very breath from her lungs. The future seemed uncertain, a bleak expanse filled with difficult choices and uncharted territory. The road ahead was fraught with peril, a path littered with the wreckage of their shared past and the daunting uncertainties of their future. All they had left was the crushing weight of their secret, a heavy burden that threatened to define the rest of their lives. The next morning, Mike woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The vague answers from the park the previous day had only fueled his determination. He needed concrete answers, not just the swirling vortex of emotions and half-truths they'd exchanged. He started with the fertility clinic, a sterile, impersonal building that seemed to mirror the coldness he felt inside. The receptionist, a woman with tired eyes and a bored demeanor, barely looked up from her computer as she directed him to a waiting room filled with the hushed anxieties of others seeking answers about their origins. The wait felt interminable, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension coiled in his gut. Finally, a nurse called his name, leading him to a small, sparsely furnished office. The doctor, a woman with sharp, assessing eyes, reviewed his file, her expression unreadable. He felt like a specimen under a microscope, his life story reduced to a series of clinical details. The information she offered was minimal, shrouded in legal jargon and medical terminology. The clinic's records, she'd explained, were limited, owing to the age and the privacy laws surrounding donor anonymity. She offered a summary of the donor's profile: a seemingly healthy male with a certain blood type and physical characteristics, but nothing that offered any real insight into the man who was half of his genetic makeup. The donor's identity remained shrouded in secrecy, protected by a veil of anonymity that felt both infuriating and suffocating. Frustrated, Mike pushed for more. He pressed the doctor about any potential scandals or irregularities that might have occurred during that period, mentioning the rumors he'd heard. The doctor's face tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her features. She confirmed that there had indeed been some internal investigations into the clinic's practices during the relevant years, but insisted that they had been resolved and that no significant negligence had been proven. Her words, however, lacked conviction, her carefully constructed composure hinting at a truth she was unwilling to reveal. He left the clinic feeling more lost than ever, the sterile environment amplifying his sense of isolation. The next step was his mother. He drove to her house, his heart pounding a rhythm of anticipation and apprehension. He found her in the garden, tending to her roses. The sight of her, her back slightly stooped, her hair streaked with gray, brought a fresh wave of conflicting emotions. He loved her, deeply and unconditionally, yet the knowledge of her deception cast a long shadow over his feelings. The conversation was difficult, fraught with silences and unspoken accusations. He started gently, asking about her decision to use a sperm donor. His mother's response was hesitant, revealing a carefully constructed narrative of loneliness, a desperate desire for a child, and the societal pressures of her time. She painted a picture of a woman facing a difficult choice, a choice made out of necessity and love, not malice or deceit. Her explanation was laced with remorse, with a deep-seated regret for not sharing her secret sooner. She spoke of financial constraints, of the stigma associated with single motherhood, of the desperate longing to have a family. But Mike pressed further, pushing past her carefully crafted words, seeking the truth beneath the carefully constructed facade. He pressed her on the specifics, the name of the clinic, the details of the donor selection process, anything that could shed light on how two women in the same small town had chosen the same anonymous donor. As he pressed, a tremor of fear entered her voice, a subtle shift in her demeanor that suggested a hidden truth. Slowly, painstakingly, the pieces began to fit together. His mother's story was one of desperation and limited choices, not malicious intent. Yet, it was also a story of negligence, of a system that failed to adequately address the ethical implications of donor anonymity. Through her fragmented memories, he pieced together the chaotic circumstances surrounding her decision, learning of how her doctor had been overstretched, how the details of the donor profiles were incomplete, and how the small-town community had created an atmosphere of unspoken pressure and shared secrets. It wasn't a deliberate deception. Not exactly. It was, perhaps, a confluence of desperation, limited options, and a societal environment that created both a need and an opportunity for secrecy. He found himself grappling not only with his own identity but also with the complexities of his mother's choices, her vulnerabilities, and the unforeseen consequences of her actions. The search for answers had unexpectedly shifted the focus from anger and betrayal to understanding and empathy, a profound shift that softened the harsh edges of his initial resentment. He learned that several women in their small town had chosen the same clinic, drawn by its reputation, or rather, lack of a negative one. It turned out that many of the donors' details were, in fact, far from accurate and well vetted. There had been an internal audit and investigation launched years later by the clinic itself, when rumors started circulating around several of the pregnancies and subsequent births resulting from the donor program. The revelation of the clinic's inadequate practices and the lack of proper oversight only deepened Mike's sense of betrayal. It wasn't just his mother's silence. It was a system-wide failure, a negligence that had irrevocably altered the course of many lives, including his own. The sterile environment of the clinic, previously a symbol of his confusion and frustration, now felt like a symbol of a broader societal issue, a system that prioritized profit over ethical considerations, leaving vulnerable women with limited options and creating a cascade of unforeseen consequences. Simultaneously, Susan was undergoing her own investigation. She had delved into her mother's past, poring over old photographs, letters, and diaries. She discovered a woman who was both strong and vulnerable, a woman who had kept her secrets close, shielding her daughter from the complexities of her own life choices. Her mother's journals revealed a story of longing, of a struggle against societal expectations, and of a desperate desire to build a family. The stories that Susan discovered only mirrored and echoed many of the details that Mike had discovered within his own family, a startling echo of shared experiences and similar circumstances. The pieces slowly fell into place, not with the neat resolution of a puzzle, but with the messy complexity of real life. It wasn't a clear case of deliberate deception. It was a confluence of circumstances, a lack of transparency and proper information from a fertility clinic, societal pressures pushing women towards secrecy, and a series of unfortunate choices made in embrace. Environment lacking sufficient support. The revelation, while painful, also offered a glimmer of understanding, a softening of the harsh edges of anger and resentment. The past remained a painful truth, but the future now held a space for forgiveness, for reconciliation, and for grappling with the complex web of factors that had led them to this painful discovery. The shared secret, once a source of overwhelming pain, now became a shared burden, a painful truth that bound them together in a way that transcended the biological connection they had never intended. The road ahead remained uncertain, but the shared understanding and a newfound empathy paved a way forward, allowing a different type of healing to begin.